Hello and welcome back to another episode of a Cozy Christmas Podcast. My name is Art and we are on the verge of November and suddenly there's going to be 2 months until Christmas. Time has flown. I was talking to someone the other day who is of a more advanced age than myself, and they commented how it seems like the years go by so much faster and faster the older we get. And I agreed with that. It does feel like time is just zipping by. My family is growing and doing well. Some big life events are happening with my oldest son. He'll be getting married next spring. He'll be finishing up college this December. My other son has a full-time job now, and he's happily working. My daughter, Grace, you all know, she's in high school, has a boyfriend, and a really nice young man. She's growing up. She's becoming a wonderful singer and musician herself. Yeah, I'm growing sideways because I keep making treats. I want to share one of those treats with you today that became a family favorite, I think, rather quickly. So this came from the Facebook page called Daily Stories, but it's called Pumpkin Cinnamon Roll Muffins. The picture it showed looked nothing like how they came out. In fact, they came out kind of ugly looking. And I'll preface this also by saying I think the recipe is a little off. For instance, there's like a cinnamon sugar mixture that you can make to put like inside the muffin and then sprinkle on top. It kind of gives it that cinnamon roll taste. But I don't know if it didn't come out right or the directions were wrong or I messed something up. So just know that many in the comments said that the picture was misleading. It didn't look like their product either. It does taste good, but I feel like it could be tweaked a little bit. So maybe this will inspire you to find or create your own recipe for this, because the end result was that it tasted pretty good. I'll just run quick through the ingredients. Basically, you to make the muffins themselves, you take 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour. I will say that at least when I made it, this only made about 12 muffins, and those even were a little on the smaller side. So if you have a big family or these become popular, you might want to double the recipe. But you take the flour, mix it with 1/2 cup of granulated sugar, a tablespoon of baking powder, some salt, ground cinnamon, and nutmeg. And you mix that together. And then the wet ingredients are 1/2 cup of canned pumpkin puree, 1/4 cup of milk, 1/4 cup of vegetable oil, a large egg, a teaspoon of vanilla, and that's the wet ingredients. And then you can bind them and mix them up. Now, when I did that, it came out pretty dry. And I'm not sure if muffin batter should be that dry or not. The directions say you're supposed to take a toothpick and swirl the top so that it has like that cinnamon roll type swirl look on it. But I felt like the dough itself was pretty dry. So I added a little bit more pumpkin to it. And that may be where I might have diluted the cinnamon taste a little bit, because it wasn't quite as cinnamony enough for me. So I don't know. Play around with it. Look around online, see what you can find out. Then what you do is you take the muffin pans, you fill them up halfway, and then you put in the cinnamon swirl ingredients, which was only 1/4 cup of sugar with a tablespoon of ground cinnamon, 2 tablespoons of melted butter, and you mix that together. It turned out to be kind of a crumble. So it wasn't really a swirl. I was thinking swirl would be runny, but this was more crumbly. It looked like brown sugar, basically. So I sprinkled some in the middle, and then you pour the rest on top. And then you take whatever of your cinnamon swirl that you have left and sprinkle that on top of the muffin. So you'll have it both in the middle and on top of the muffin. And then you bake it for, this says 18 to 20 minutes at 375 degrees or until the toothpick comes clean. And mine only took about 16 minutes. I think if I had left it in a little longer, it would have either burned or really have become dry. Keep an eye on that, but I'm sure the more experienced bakers you could do better at this. And that was it. It was pretty easy to put together, I must say, for an amateur like me. And then once they cool, you can add the glaze on top, which was just a half a cup of powdered sugar, a tablespoon of milk, and a quarter teaspoon of vanilla. Now, I needed to make extra. Maybe I put too much glaze on, but I like a lot of glaze, and I think it needed it because they look pretty ugly, especially when you compare them to the original picture. Just nothing like it at all. The original picture looked like little cinnamon rolls in a muffin tin, coming out the top. It looked like a muffin, but then with a cinnamon roll top. So a lot of people in the comments thought maybe that was computer generated, and some even speculated that maybe ChatGPT came up with the recipe because several found it to be just a little off. For something about it just didn't strike right. But whatever the case, the glaze turned out great, and was able to cover those up and enjoyed them with my coffee this morning. And let me tell you, they tasted pretty good. I made them last night before bed, and I was kind of having trouble sleeping, so I thought I'd do some baking. And my wife said she got up she woke up about 10:30 or 11 and couldn't figure out why the house was smelling so good, like pumpkin bread or something. That's another recipe I've tried this month. Now we're heading into November and December, and I want to start sharing some of your recipes. Send me a recipe, the ingredients. Maybe it's a family secret and you don't want to, that's fine. You can at least tell me what it is and share a story or a memory you have around that. Now, if you like, you can record it yourself and send it in, or just type up something and I'll read it on an upcoming episode. But I thought it would be fun to help add to our cozy Christmas experience. So one of the things that I enjoy about the Christmas season is all the warm, delicious food that there is. And I'm hoping to try some new recipes this year. So stay tuned. We have more coming up. That's what I've been baking and eating this week. So if this comes out on time, Halloween is just a day or two away. And I love to read the spooky type Christmas stories, or stories that maybe don't necessarily have to do with Christmas, but are supernatural in tone, because the Victorians would tell ghost stories around the family fire. I recently talked about that on a segment for Tim Babb's Can't Wait for Christmas podcast. Have you listened to my show, but you don't know about Tim's podcast? Either you did something wrong or the internet algorithm did something really, really right. But it's a great, funny podcast. He talked about all kinds of things about Christmas. His was one of the first Christmas podcasts I discovered, and part of what drew me into this addiction I have now for Christmas podcasts. All that aside, Tim is a wonderful host. So today I wanted to find a story suitable for the Halloween time. And I think I found one, and it's called Little Roger's Night in the Church. And it's by American author Susan Coolidge. She lived from 1835 to 1905. And her real name was Sarah Chauncey Woolsey. I probably mispronounced that. And according to Wikipedia, she was born into the wealthy, influential New England Dwight family in Cleveland, Ohio. She worked as a nurse during the American Civil War, after which she started to write. She never married and resided at her family home in Newport, Rhode Island until her death. She is best known for her classic children's novel, What Katy Did, which was published in 1872. And the fictional Carr family was modeled after her own, with Katy Carr inspired by Woolsey herself. Now, and Wikipedia has a picture of her, and She's a dead ringer for a young Maggie Smith, who, of course, played McGonagall in the Harry Potter films and was one of my favorite older actresses. So that was weird to see that. I don't know. It just looked like that to me. But maybe Maggie Smith is just an immortal, and now that she has passed, she's been rejuvenated somewhere. But anyway, wonderful story to read. Now, Little Roger's Night in the Church. It starts off with a very cozy vibe. It's Christmas Eve. Roger's grandfather was the local clergy, or he was a sexton, which is, again, a church employee. He's responsible for the maintenance of the church's buildings and things like that. So Roger gets accidentally locked in the church at night. Have you ever thought about spending the night in a spooky old church? You might be surprised what happens. So with that, I invite you to come in and sit down here by my Christmas fire. The kettle is on and the muffins are warm. And I'll read to you Little Roger's Night in the Church by Susan Coolidge. First published in 1874. The boys and girls had fastened the last sprig of holly upon the walls, and then gone to their homes, leaving the old church silent and deserted. The sun had set in a sky clear and yellow as topaz. Christmas Eve had fairly come, and now the moon was rising, a full moon, and all the world looked white in the silver light. Every bough of every tree sparkled with delicate coating of frost. The pines and cedars were great shapes of dazzling snow. Even the ivy on the Gothic tower hung a glittering arabesque on the gray wall. Never was there a lovelier night. That light you see yonder comes from the window of old Andrew, the sexton, and inside sits his grandson, little Roger, eating his supper of porridge. The kitchen is in apple pie order. Chairs and tables have been scrubbed as white as snow. The tins on the dresser shine like silver. The hearth is swept clean, and grandfather's chair is drawn into the warmest corner. Grandfather is not sitting in it, though. He has gone to the church to put the fire in order for the night, lock up the doors, and make all safe. Grandmother, in her clean stuff gown and apron, is mounted upon a chair to stick a twig of holly on the tall clock in the corner. And now, as she turns around, what a pleasant face she shows us, does she not? Old and wrinkled, to be sure, but so good-natured and gentle that she is prettier than many a young girl even now. Is it any wonder that little Roger there is so fond of her? Now, another bit of holly is wanted on the chimney-piece, and it is while putting this up that the dear old dame gives sign that something has gone wrong. Oh, dearie me! What's the matter, Granny? Said Roger. Why, Roger, replied Granny, carefully dismounting from her chair. Look here, Grandfather has gone off and forgot his keys. He took 'em from the door this morning, because last year some of the young folks let 'em drop in the snow and had a sad time hunting for them. He knew they would be in and out all day, so he just opened the door and brought the keys home. Dearie me, it's a cold night for old bones to be out of doors. Wouldst be afeard, little un, to run up with them? Not a bit, said Roger, stoutly, as he crammed the last spoonful of porridge in his mouth and seized hat and mittens from the table. I'll take 'em down in a minute, Granny, and then run home. Mother'll want me in the morning, likely. For Roger's parents lived in a cottage near the old people, and the boy often said that he had two homes and belonged half in one and half in the other. And the small pressed bed in Granny's loft seemed as much his own as the cot in the corner of his mother's sleeping room, and was occupied almost as often. So after a good night hug from Granny, off he ran. The church was near, and the moon light as day, so he never thought of being afraid, not even when, as he brushed by the dark tower, something stirred overhead, and a long, melancholy cry came shuddering from the ivy. Roger knew the owls in the belfry well, and now he called out to them cheerily, "To-wit-wit-woo! Woo-hoo-wit!" answered the owls, startled by the cry. Roger could hear them fluttering in the nest. The church door stood ajar, and he peeped in. The glow from the open door of the stove showed Grandfather's figure, red and warm, stooping to cover the fire with ashes for the night. He was so busy, he never knew the boy was there till he got close to him and jingled the keys in his ear. But after one start he laughed, well pleased. I but just missed them," he said. "Thou'rt a good boy to fetch them up. Art going home with me tonight?" "No, I'm to sleep at my mother's," said Roger, "but I'll wait and walk with you, Grandfather." So he slipped into a pew and sat down till the work should be finished, and they ready to go. And as he looked up, he saw all at once how beautiful the old church was looking. The moon outside was streaming in so brightly that you hardly missed the sun. Roger could see distinctly way up to the carved beams of the roof, and trace the figures on the great arched windows over the altar, whose colors had so often dazzled him on Sundays. The colors were soft and dim now, but the figures were there. Roger could see them plainly. The sitting figure of the Lord Christ, with St. Matthew and 2 other apostles, and the fisher lad with his basket of fish. He had often asked Granny to read him the story. That gleam at the further end of the nave came from the organ loft, where the moonbeams had found out the great brass pipes, and were playing all manner of tricks with them. Almost the red of the holly berries could be seen, and every pointed ivy leaf and spike of evergreen in the wreathings of the window stood out in bold relief against the shining panes. With this beautiful whiteness the red glow of the fire blended and flooded the chancel with a lovely pink light, in which shone the gilded letters on the commandment tables, and the brasses of the tablets on the walls. It was a wonderful thing to see. To study the roof better, Roger thought he would lie flat on the cushion a while and look straight up. So he arranged himself comfortably, and somehow, it will happen even when we are full of enjoyment and pleasure, his eyes shut, and the first thing he knew he was rubbing them open again, only a minute afterward, as it seemed. But Grandfather was gone. There was the stove closed for the night, and the great door at the end of the aisle was shut. He jumped up in a fright, as you can imagine, and ran to see and shook it hard. No, it was locked, and poor Roger was fastened in for the night. He understood it all in a moment. The tall pew had hidden him from sight. Grandfather had thought him gone home. His mother would never doubt that he was safe at the other cottage. No one would miss him, and there would be no chance of being let out before morning. He was only 6 years old, so no wonder that at first he felt choked and frightened and inclined to cry. But he was a brave lad, and that idea soon left him. He began to think that he was not badly off, after all. The church was warm, the pew cushion as soft as his bed. No one could get in to harm him. In fact, after the first moment, there was something so exciting and adventurous in the idea of spending the night in such a place that he was almost glad the accident had happened. So he went back to the pew and tried to go to sleep again. That was not so easy. Did you ever get thoroughly waked up in the night by a sudden fright? Do you remember how your eyes wouldn't stay shut afterward, even when you closed them tight, but jerked open almost against your will, as if a string was fastened to them and someone was twitching it? Just so poor Roger felt. He lay still and kept himself quiet for a moment, and then some little noise would come, and his heart beat and his eyes be wide open in a minute. It was a coal dropping from the fire, or a slight crack on the frosty panes. Once a little mouse crept out from the chancel, glaring shyly about with his bright eyes, nibbled a moment at a leaf on the carpet, and then crept back again. No other living thing disturbed the quiet. He heard the clock strike 11 a long time since, and was lying with eyes half shut, gazing at the red fire grate, and feeling at last a little drowsy, when all at once a strange rush and thrill seemed to come to him in the air, like a cool, clear wind blowing through the church, and in 1 minute he was wide awake and sitting upright, with ears strained to catch some sound afar off. It was too distant and faint for ordinary sense, but a new and sharper power of hearing seemed given him. Little voices were speaking high in the air outside the church, very odd ones like birds' notes, and yet the words were plain. He listened and made out at last that it was the owls in the tower talking together. "Hoo, hoo, why don't you lie still there?" said one. "Whit, hoo, whit," said the other. I can't. I know what is coming too well for that." "What is coming? What?" said two voices together. "Ah, you'll see soon," replied the first. "The elves are coming, the hateful Christmas elves. You'll not get a wink of sleep tonight." "Why not? What will they do to us?" chirped the young ones. "You'll see," hooted the old owl. "You'll see. They'll pull your tails and tickle your feathers and prick you with thorns. I know them, the tricksy, troublesome things. I've been here many a long year. You were only hatched last summer. To-hoo, to-hoo." Just at this moment the church clock began to strike 12. At the first clang the owls ceased to hoot, and Roger listened to the deep notes, almost awestruck, as they sounded one by one. He knew the voice of the clock well, but it never before sounded so loud or so solemn. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It was Christmas Day. As the last echo died away, a new sound took its place. From afar off came the babble of tiny voices drawing nearer. Anything so gay and charming was never dreamed of before. Half a laugh, half a song, the tones blended into an enchanting peal, like the bells on a frolic. Above the old tower the sounds clustered and increased. Then a long, distressed cry came from the owl, and a bubbling laugh floated in on the wind. Roger could not stand it. Wild to see, he flew to the window and tried to stretch his neck in such a way as to catch what was going on above. But it was a vain attempt, and just then the church bells began to ring all together, a chime, a Christmas chime, only the sounds were infinitely small, as if baby hands had laid hold on the ropes. But his sharpened senses brought every note and change to Roger's ears, and they were so merry and so lovely that he felt he must get nearer or die. And almost before he knew it, he was climbing the dark belfry stairs, as fast as his feet could carry him, never thinking of fear or darkness, only of the elfin bells which were pealing overhead. Up through the long slits in the tower, the moon could be seen sailing in the cold, clear blue. Higher. At last he gained the belfry. There hung the 4 great bells, but nobody was pulling at their heavy ropes. On each iron tongue was perched a fay. On the chains which suspended them clustered others, all keeping time by the swaying of their bodies as they swung to and fro, just grazing either side and bringing forth a clear, delicate stroke, sweet as laughter, just loud enough for fairy ears. Through the windows the crowd of floating fays could be seen whirling about in the moonlight like glittering gossamer. They floated in and out of the tower. They mounted the great bells and sat atop in swarms. They chased and pushed each other, playing all sorts of pranks. Below, others were attacking the owl's nest. Roger could hear their hoots and grunts and the gleeful laughter of the elves. The moon made the tower light as noon. All the time the elves sang or talked, which he could not tell. There were words, but also blent with laughs and mirthful trills that it was nothing less than music. To and fro, keeping time to a fairy rhythm, they swayed in unison with the tiny peal they rang. Little quarrels arose. Once Roger watched an elf trying to mount the clapper, and whenever he neared the top, a mischievous comrade pushed him off again. Then the elf pouted, and flying away, he returned with a holly leaf. Small as it was, it curled over his head like a huge umbrella. With the spiky point, he slyly pricked the elf above, and he, taken by surprise, lost his hold and came tumbling down, while the other danced for glee and clapped his hands mockingly. Pretty soon, however, all was made up again. They kissed and were friends. And Roger saw them perched opposite each other and moving to and fro like children in a swing. How long the pretty sight lasted he could not tell. So fearful was he of marring the sport that he never stirred a finger. But all at once there came a strain of music in the air, solemn and sweeter than ever mortal heard before. In a moment the elves left their sports. They clustered like bees together in the window, and then flew from the tower in one sparkling drift, and were gone, leaving Roger alone, and the owls hooting below in the ivy. And then he felt afraid, which he had not been as long as the fays were there. And down he ran in a fright over the stone steps of the stairs, and entered the church again. The red glow of the fire was grateful to him, for he was shivering with cold and excitement. But hardly had he regained his old seat when, lo, a great marvel came to pass. The wide window over the altar swung open, and a train of angels slowly floated through. How he knew them to be angels, Roger could not have told, but that they were, he was sure. Christmas angels, with faces of calm, glorious beauty, and robes as white as snow. Over the altar they hovered, and a wonderful song rose and filled the church. No bird's strain was ever half so sweet. The words were few, but again and again and again they came. Glory to God in the highest, on earth peace, goodwill to men. Roger knew the oft-repeated words. They were those of the great evergreen motto which overarched the chancel. But I think he never forgot the beautiful meaning they seemed to bear as the angels sang them over and over. It was so wondrous sweet that he could not feel afraid. He could only gaze and hold his breath lest he should lose a note. And the song rang on, clear and triumphant, even as the white-robed choir parted and floated like soft summer clouds to and fro in the church, pausing ever and anon as in blessing. They touched the leaves of the Christmas green as they passed. They hung over the organ and brushed keys with their wings. A long time they clustered above the benches of the poor, as if to leave a fragrance in the air. And then they rested before a tablet which had been put up but a few months before, and which bore the name of the rector's eldest son and the dates of his birth and death. Roger had been told of this brave lad, and how he had lost his life in plunging from his ship to save the drowning child of an emigrant. And now the angel song seemed sweeter than ever, as over and again they chanted, "Goodwill to men, goodwill to men." At last one of the white-winged ones left the others and hovered a while above the squire's pew, near which our little boy was hidden. A prayer book lay open on the rail, and over this the fair angel bent as in benediction. A girl had sat there once, the squire's only daughter. Roger remembered her well, in the mourning of the whole parish when, only a 12-month ago, the lovely child had been buried from their sight. And now, as he timidly glanced into the glorious face above him, it seemed to him to have the same look, only so ineffably beautiful that he closed his dazzled eyes to shut out the vision and the light that shone from the white wings. Only for a moment, then he opened them again as a gentle rustling filled the air. and he saw the bending figure stoop, leave a kiss or a blessing on the pages of the open book, and then glide away with the others. Again, the group hovered above the altar. Louder and clearer rose the triumphant strain, and noiseless as a cloud the snowy train floated to the window. For one moment their figures could be seen against the sky. Then the song died away. They were gone, and Roger saw them no more. And now the light of dawn began to creep into the windows. Twittering sounds showed the birds awakening outside, and a pink streak appeared in the sky. Too much wrapped by his vision to feel impatience, the boy sat and waited. And by a jingling in the lock showed grandfather at hand. The door opened and he came in. You can guess his surprise when his little grandson flew to meet him with his wonderful story. As for the story, he pooh-poohed that. Sleeping in such a strange place might well bring about a queer dream, he said. But he took the boy home to the cottage, and Granny, full of wonderment and sympathy, speedily prepared a breakfast for her darling after his adventure. But even with his mouth full of scalding bread and milk, Roger would go on telling of angels and fairies and the owls' talk in their nest till both grandparents began to think him bewitched. Perhaps he was, for to this day he persists in the story. And though the villagers that morning exclaimed that at no time had their old church, in its Christmas dress, looked so beautiful before, and though the organ sent forth a rarer, sweeter music than fingers had ever drawn from it, still nobody believed a word of it. And though the poor mother, kneeling in her lonely pew and missing her darling from beside her, felt a strange peace and patience enter her heart, and came away calmed and blessed, still no one listened to the story. Roger had dreamed it all, they said, and perhaps he had. Only the owls knew. The end. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed that story. Now, some of you might be afraid to go into a church, especially at night. I know some people who tell me if I were to walk into a church, lightning would strike me down immediately, or I might burst into flames. Now, I have seen a lot of people walk into church, some very surprising people walk into a church, and it has not happened yet in my experience. So don't let that stop you. There are other reasons, I suppose, that could stop you from going to church, but spontaneous combustion is not one of them. I love the story because it really straddles the line of cozy and kind of spooky, because you're not sure what's going on when the fays appear and the fairies are singing and flying around and doing all the things and tormenting the poor owls. You know, you wonder, is this going to get spooky or scary, or are they just being like little naughty fairies, which kind of is where the story ends with that. I love that that he can suddenly understand the owls and that they talk. Isn't it a tradition that on Christmas Eve animals can talk? I thought I read that somewhere. So I had to check. And yes, there is a myth that animals can talk on Christmas Eve, especially at midnight, which is exactly what happened in the story. That's really interesting. So according to this myth, animals can speak and praise God for the birth of Jesus. The animals may face east and kneel down at midnight. And I found out that in Lithuania, animals can speak to children at midnight on Christmas Eve and tell them what their future holds. So then the fairies are all chased away when the angels arrive, and Roger gets to see kind of his version of the shepherds seeing the angels singing, announcing Jesus' birth. I like what this is saying, that the angels come into the church and they bless the certain things that are around the room. They leave a blessing behind in the pews of those who are poor and those who are suffering loss. If you think of the story almost as a metaphor, that it reminds me that God is watching out for those who are in need and those who are hurting. He understands, and he has a special blessing for you. And to me, that's comforting. And then to see this done and like through the eyes of a child, that he's visualizing God actually leaving behind these blessings. To me, it also reminds me of the scene from A Christmas Carol when the ghost of Christmas Present is spreading his from his horn of plenty, that special mixture of his own that he uses to sprinkle on people who are fighting and people who are needing a blessing. He spreads this love and blessing around to those in need and to those, who might need that. So that ties into that story as well. So my big question for you, have you ever heard your animals talk? And if you have, what did they say? We have 2 parakeets. Unfortunately, our much beloved parakeet, Pickwick, died just about a month ago, but we got a new one and replaced him with another parakeet we named Bilbo. And so Bilbo and Daisy were just chattering back and forth to each other the other day. And Grace wondered, what is it that birds talk to each other about so much? They'll just chatter and chatter and chatter to each other all day long. And we wonder, if we could understand what they were saying, what would they be saying? What would they be talking about? I, of course, thought that they were probably talking about what they're going to do for Christmas and discussing the latest episode of A Cozy Christmas Podcast, I'm sure. Well, before I go too far off into crazy town, there is just something magical, something special about Christmas Eve. I maintain that that's my favorite day of the year, that I love Christmas Eve even more than Christmas Day itself. All the preparations are concluding. The celebration tomorrow is about to begin. You're on the verge of experiencing perhaps some blessing or special moments with family. It's just wonderful. And I know some of you, and I've talked about this before, we like to go outside at night on Christmas Eve and just experience a few moments of quiet before the big day and reflect. And I would love for you to do that. For whatever reason you celebrate Christmas, whether religious or non-religious, take a few moments to just reflect, especially on Christmas Eve, if you're able, to take a deep breath and enjoy those moments before the big day. Well, that's my story for today. I would love to hear from you about your favorite recipes. Again, make sure to send them to me at cozychristmaspodcast@gmail.com or send me a message on one of my social media accounts. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and occasionally Twitter if it's not too much of a dumpster fire today. As always, there are links in my show notes that will, if you're wanting to help support the podcast in a financial way, there are things you can buy on Etsy, ornaments. I think I have a few left. I'm not sure. T-shirts, podcast merch, the general stuff. If you support me on Ko-fi, I'll send you a bookmark and sticker for the podcast. And so until next time, remember to honor Christmas in your heart and try to keep it all the year. Have a very Merry Christmas.